It was Jake's birthday, but the evening felt colder than usual. The city lights outside his window flickered like tiny stars, yet none of them could warm his heart. He sat alone at the small dining table in his apartment, a single candle glowing on a half-eaten cake. The sound of rain tapped gently against the window, like a quiet reminder that no one was coming. Jake's phone buzzed with messages from friends and coworkers, wishing him a happy birthday, inviting him out for dinner. He smiled weakly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It had been 2 years since his wife passed away, and every birthday since felt emptier than the last. Only his daughter, little Emma, could make him smile again, but tonight, she was staying at her grandma's house far away, because Jake had to work the morning shift. He told himself he'd celebrate later with her, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't be the same. Jake stood up and walked toward the window, watching the distant glow of cars passing by. He sighed, thinking about how life had changed. Once, birthdays were full of laughter, music, and love. Now, they were just quiet nights and fading memories. He looked at the framed photo on the shelf, his wife, Sarah, smiling as she held baby Emma. Jake whispered softly, "I'm trying, Sarah." The silence of the room answered him back. Suddenly, a strange flash of light blinked outside. Bright and unnatural, it wasn't lightning. It was something else, something different. Jake blinked and leaned closer to the glass, trying to see where it came from in the distance. Near the dark line of the forest behind his apartment complex, a soft blue glow shimmered. It pulsed like a heartbeat, glowing and fading. Glowing again, Jake frowned. "What the?" he muttered under his breath. For a moment, he thought it might be a car or maybe kids playing with fireworks. But then the light moved, not randomly, but slowly, carefully, like it was alive. His curiosity grew stronger than his loneliness. He grabbed his jacket, slipped on his old boots, and took his flashlight from the drawer. The cake candle flickered as he walked past it, casting his shadow against the wall. He hesitated for a second, thinking this was crazy when it was late, cold, and raining. But something deep inside whispered, "Go." And so Jake stepped into the night, leaving his half-eaten cake and empty apartment behind. The forest stood silent under the moonlight, its trees swaying softly in the wind. Jake's breath turned into mist as he walked, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rain had stopped, but the ground was wet and soft under his boots. Every sound felt louder, and the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, even his own heartbeat. He followed the faint blue light deeper into the woods, each step filling him with a strange mix of fear and excitement. After a few minutes, he reached a small clearing, paused and froze. There, half buried in the muddy ground, was something he had never seen before. It looked like a metal capsule, small but perfectly shaped, smoke rising gently from its surface. Sparks flickered along its side, and strange symbols glowed faintly on the metal. Jake's mind raced. Was it a drone? A new military experiment? Or something else? He moved closer, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Then he heard it, a faint sound like a weak cry coming from inside the pod. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer and saw a small window on the surface. Cracked but still transparent, inside, he could barely make out a figure. Someone or something moving weakly. It wasn't a machine, it was alive. His pulse quickened. He pressed his hand against the cold metal and whispered, "Hey, can you hear me?" No response, just another faint movement inside. He tried to find a handle or button, something to open it. But the design was completely alien, smooth and seamless. For a moment, he thought about calling the police, but then he stopped. What if they took whatever this was and hid it? What if it was hurt? The small cry came again, softer this time, almost like a child. Jake's heart broke a little. It didn't sound dangerous, it sounded scared. Without thinking, he used a rock to hit the side panel again and again, until the metal gave way with a sharp crack. A hiss of vapor escaped and the door slid open slightly. Inside he saw her, a woman, or something like a woman, her skin pale silver, eyes glowing faintly blue. She clutched a small bundle in her arms, shielding it like a mother protecting her baby. Jake froze in shock. The alien woman's eyes opened weakly and met his. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Rain dripped from the trees above, the world completely silent around them. Her lips trembled, and she whispered one word, "Help." Jake stood there, soaked, shaking, unsure what to do. He didn't know who she was or what she wanted. But when he saw the small child in her arms, so fragile, so innocent, Something inside him changed. He didn't see an alien. He saw a mother just like his late wife once was. And without another thought, he reached out his hand. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll help you." As the forest wind blew around them, Jake didn't realize that this small act of kindness would lead to the greatest adventure of his life. Jake's hands were trembling as he reached toward the strange woman lying inside the metallic pod. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight, reflecting soft shades of silver and blue. Steam drifted up from the cracks in the pod, carrying the sharp smell of burned metal and something unfamiliar. The woman's breathing was weak and her eyelids fluttered like she was fighting to stay awake. Jake looked at the small bundle she held close to her chest. It moved, whimpering softly. It wasn't a machine, it wasn't a trick. It was a child, an alien child. Jake swallowed hard, his mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Part of him wanted to run, to call someone, anyone. But another part, the part that remembered holding baby Emma for the first time, couldn't move. He slowly knelt beside the pod and whispered, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The alien woman's eyes opened again. Glowing like deep ocean light, she didn't speak, but her gaze was filled with fear and pain. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said softly, then pointed to her. "You?" She blinked, confused at first. Then her lips moved slowly, forming one quiet word. "Elira." Her voice sounded musical, fragile, like wind through glass. Then she winced, her body shaking with pain. Jake realized she was injured. A line of dark purple blood glimmered along her shoulder. Without thinking, he took off his jacket and tore it into strips. He pressed the cloth against the wound gently. Elira gasped, flinching at first, but then looked at him with surprise. Maybe she hadn't expected kindness. "Shh," Jake said softly. "You'll be fine. I promise." The baby stirred again, making a small sound, half cry, half hum. It had small glowing lines across its forehead, pulsing gently. Jake stared at it in wonder, feeling his fear melt away, replaced by something else. A strange sense of responsibility, but then a low rumble echoed through the forest. Jake froze. He turned his flashlight off instantly and crouched low beside the pod. A sound like engines, but not from cars, filled the air. Mechanical humming through the trees. He saw faint red light sweeping slowly across the forest floor. Someone was searching. Elira's breathing grew faster, and she whispered something in a language Jake couldn't understand. But her eyes said it all. She was terrified. Jake made a quick decision. He lifted her gently, supporting her with one arm while holding the baby close in the other. Elira was lighter than he expected, her skin warm but smooth like polished stone. "Hang on," he whispered. "We can't stay here." The strange red lights moved closer. Scanning the crash site, Jake ducked behind the trees, heart pounding in his chest. His boots sank into the mud as he carried them through the thick brush. Branches scratched his face, but he didn't stop behind him. He heard a faint metallic click, then a sharp hiss. Something was out there, something not human. After what felt like hours, he reached the edge of the forest, panting. He glanced back. The blue glow of the crash was now distant. Hidden behind trees, the night had grown quieter again, but he could still sense danger in the air. Elira looked at him weakly and pointed to the sky, whispering one word: "Hunters." Jake didn't understand everything, but that word was enough, whoever they were. They were coming for her, and maybe now for him too. He carried her across the empty field and reached his apartment's back door. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then helped her inside. The warm light of his living room flickered softly, making Elira squint. She seemed amazed, touching the fabric of the couch, the framed photos on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator. Her child looked up at the ceiling light and cooed softly. Jake smiled faintly. "Welcome to Earth," he whispered. It sounded ridiculous, but also strangely right. He led her to the basement, in the safest, quietest place in the house. It smelled of old paint and wood, but it was dry and hidden. He laid her on a blanket and checked her wound again. Elira watched him carefully, unsure if she could trust him. Jake could feel her tension, so he said softly, "You're safe here, okay?" She looked at him, hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her baby reached out a tiny glowing hand, touching Jake's finger the moment their skin met. A faint spark of light appeared. It didn't burn. It felt warm, peaceful. Jake's eyes widened, but Elira smiled faintly. "Energy," she whispered. "Life." He didn't understand how, but somehow that touch meant something deeper, Something connected them. Even if they were from different worlds, Jake sat down beside them, still breathing heavily from the escape. "I don't know who you are," he said quietly, "but I'll help you. I promise." Elira watched him for a long moment before finally closing her eyes. The baby fell asleep, glowing softly like a tiny lantern. Jake leaned back against the wall, exhausted. His birthday night had turned into something no human could imagine. He looked at the sleeping alien mother and her child, and for the first time in years he didn't feel lonely anymore. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep inside, he knew it wouldn't be ordinary somewhere outside. The faint red lights moved again through the trees, searching, hunting. The night wasn't over yet, and danger was getting closer. The night dragged on slowly, filled with strange sounds and silent fear. Jake sat in the basement beside the alien woman, Elira, and her glowing child. He had covered the small basement window with an old blanket. Blocking the outside light, the air was cold, but sweat ran down his forehead as he listened carefully for any noise above. Outside, the forest was quiet again, yet Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Elira was breathing more steadily now, the color returning to her silver skin. Her wound had stopped bleeding, thanks to Jake's quick bandage. Her child lay asleep beside her, glowing softly like a dim nightlight. Jake couldn't take his eyes off them. They looked so human, and yet, not at all. It felt like looking at a reflection from another world. He whispered to himself, "What have I gotten into?" He wanted to believe it was a dream. A strange dream born from loneliness and a quiet birthday night. But the scent of burnt metal still lingered on his jacket, and the soft hum from the child's body was real. He sighed and stood up, walking to the small fridge in the corner. He poured some water into a glass and brought it to Elira. She looked at it suspiciously at first, then sniffed it before taking a small sip. Her expression softened and she nodded slightly in thanks. Jake smiled awkwardly. "You're welcome," he said. Then, trying to make sense of her, he pointed at himself. "Jake," and then at her again. "Elira," she nodded, repeating softly. "Jake." Her accent strange but gentle. Hearing her say his name made him feel something warm inside, something he hadn't felt in years. Moments later, she reached for a small metallic band around her wrist. She pressed a few buttons and suddenly, a soft blue hologram appeared above it. Jake jumped back in shock, eyes wide. The hologram showed a planet, beautiful, covered with silver oceans and floating cities. But then it flickered into chaos. Explosions, fire, dark ships surrounding the world. Elira's face darkened, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Home. Destroyed," she said slowly. The words broken but understandable. Jake stared, speechless, watching as she showed images of the destruction. He saw ships falling, cities collapsing, families running, and then a glowing crystal core, small but powerful, the same shape as the device Jake saw inside her pod. Elira pointed to it and said, "Energy. Life. They want." Jake frowned, trying to understand. "Someone is hunting you for that?" She nodded, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "Hunters." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. So it wasn't an accident. She had been escaping, hiding, running from something dangerous, and now those hunters were probably still out there searching, maybe even near his home. He took a deep breath and said firmly, "You can stay here. No one will find you." Elira looked surprised, maybe even confused. She didn't understand why a stranger would help her, but Jake just smiled weakly and added, "You helped me too." "In a way." She tilted her head, unsure what he meant. He didn't explain, but deep down he knew. Helping her gave him purpose again, something he had lost since Sarah's death. Hours passed quietly. Jake moved around carefully, covering windows, turning off unnecessary lights. He brought down some bread, fruit, and blankets for them. Elira tried to mimic his actions, watching him curiously, learning. When he handed her the food, she examined it first, sniffing it like a cautious animal. Then she took a small bite, and her eyes widened. She seemed to like it. Her child giggled softly, a sound that made Jake smile for a brief moment. The basement felt peaceful, almost like a home. But the peace didn't last long. Around midnight, Jake heard a low hum again, faint but clear, coming from outside. He froze. The same sound he had heard in the forest was now closer. Elira's eyes snapped open, glowing brighter. She whispered, "Hunters. Near." Jake's stomach twisted with fear. He turned off the single lamp and motioned for silence. Together they listened, and faint footsteps above. Moving across his backyard, a sharp beam of red light flashed through the window crack. Scanning, Jake held his breath, his heart pounding so loud he thought they might hear it. The sound passed slowly and the lights faded. Only after a few minutes did Jake dare to whisper, "They're looking for you." Alira nodded sadly. Clutching her child tighter, her face showed guilt and sorrow, as if she knew she had brought danger to his door. When the sounds finally faded into the distance, Jake sat down beside her again. He whispered, "You need to rest. I'll keep watch." Alira looked at him for a long time, then touched her wrist device again. A small light projected between them, a glowing map of stars. She pointed at one bright point and said softly, "Home." Then she pointed at a smaller star. "Here." Jake stared at it in awe, realizing how far she must have come. Light years away across endless space, and somehow she ended up in his backyard. He couldn't decide if it was fate or madness. Before closing her eyes, Alira said something else, her voice faint but sincere. "Jake, kind," she whispered, her accent soft but full of meaning. Those two words hit him harder than anything else that night. He smiled quietly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. As the first light of dawn began to touch the sky outside, Jake leaned against the wall, still holding the flashlight in his hand. He looked at Alira and her child, safe for now. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Because whatever she was running from hadn't given up yet. And soon they would come knocking. The next evening came wrapped in silence, but Jake could feel the danger in the air. The sun had barely set when the forest outside his home began to hum again. Not the normal whisper of wind or rustle of trees, and this was mechanical. Heavy and unnatural, Jake stood near the window, peeking through the small crack in the curtain. In the distance, faint red lights moved between the trees like ghostly fireflies. He swallowed hard, his heart pounding against his ribs. "They're back," he whispered to himself. Down in the basement, Alira sensed it too. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and she held her child close, whispering words in her strange language. When Jake came down, she looked up with fear and urgency. "Hunters," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "They find?" Jake nodded, trying to stay calm. "I'll handle it. Stay quiet, stay hidden." He moved quickly, shutting off every light in the house until only darkness remained. The hum outside grew louder, closer, almost vibrating through the floor. He peeked again through the curtain and his stomach tightened. Black vehicles had stopped near the edge of the woods. Silent, sleek and marked with no symbols. Men in dark suits stepped out, each wearing black helmets with red visors that glowed faintly. They carried devices that pulsed with blue light. Scanning the ground, the trees, the air, Jake whispered under his breath, "They're not from around here." These weren't ordinary people, and this wasn't any normal search. He backed away from the window slowly, his pulse racing. One of the men raised a strange scanner, a spinning device that emitted a low pulse. The red light spread outward like a net, sweeping across the neighborhood. Jake realized with a chill, they were scanning for alien energy signatures. Alira's child still glowed softly in the basement. Even under the blanket, if that scanner reached the house, they'd be caught instantly. Jake ran downstairs, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to block the light. Now." He grabbed a thick old quilt and wrapped the baby in it gently. Hiding every trace of glow, Alira looked terrified but trusted him. She whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Her silver fingers clutching his arm for a moment, Jake nodded. "It's okay. I won't let them take you." Suddenly, a loud knock at the door. Jake froze, every muscle in his body tense. Another knock, louder this time. He walked upstairs slowly, his hand trembling on the doorknob. When he opened the door slightly, a tall man in a dark suit stood there, his red visor glowing in the night. "Good evening, sir," the man said in a calm but cold voice. "We're conducting an investigation. Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" Jake forced a smile, his voice shaking slightly. "No, sir, just me here." "Quiet night?" The man tilted his head, scanning Jake from head to toe, then glanced past him into the house. Jake's hand tightened on the door, blocking the view. "I see," the man said slowly, pausing before adding, "If you do notice anything, strange sounds, lights, call this number." He handed Jake a black card with a silver emblem. Jake nodded. "Sure thing." The man gave a polite smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. then turned and walked away. But before leaving, he said something to another agent through his helmet, and the word signal caught Jake's ear. When the vehicles finally moved deeper into the woods, Jake shut the door and locked it fast. He leaned back against it, breathing hard. His hands were cold and shaking. He ran downstairs, whispering, "They're looking for you. And they're close, too close." Elira's face went pale silver, and her glowing eyes filled with worry. She pressed her wristband, projecting another hologram. This one showed 3 blinking dots moving across a grid. Jake understood immediately. "Those are the hunters," she nodded weakly. "They track energy." "My core, my child." Jake felt anger rise inside him. "Then we hide it." He grabbed an old metal toolbox and stuffed it with spare wires and batteries. Elira looked confused, but Jake smiled slightly. "You're not the only one who can tinker." Years of fixing broken machines at work had taught him something useful. He took apart an old microwave, ripped out the power converter, and connected it to a lead pipe. The small device started humming, a faint electrical pulse. "Fake signal," Jake said proudly. "If they're tracking energy, maybe they'll chase this instead." Elira's eyes widened in surprise. "Clever. Human clever." He grinned faintly. "I try." Jake carried the decoy outside through the back door, hiding it under a pile of metal junk behind his shed. Then he rushed back in, locking everything again minutes later. The red scanning lights returned, stronger, closer. They hovered near the shed, flashing rapidly from inside the basement. Jake and Elira watched through the tiny window crack, holding their breath. The light stopped near the shed for a few seconds, then moved away into the trees. It worked. Jake exhaled slowly, his body shaking with relief. Elira smiled faintly for the first time. Whispering, "You save us," he smiled back. For now, the night passed slowly, filled with distant hums and flickers of red light. Jake didn't sleep at all, sitting on the basement floor. Listening, waiting at dawn, the world outside fell silent again. No vehicles, no lights, just the soft call of morning birds. Elira stood near the small window, her face calm but sad. "They not stop," she said quietly. "They come again." Jake nodded, looking up at her with tired eyes. "Then we'll be ready." He didn't know how, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let them take her or that child. Not after what he'd seen, not after everything he'd already lost. The hunters might have the technology, but Jake had something stronger: heart, courage, and a reason to fight, and sometimes, in the darkest corners of the universe, that was enough. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, turning Jake's living room into a pale golden blur. For a few quiet seconds, he could almost pretend everything was normal. Then he looked toward the basement door and remembered the truth. An alien mother and her child were hiding beneath his home. And somewhere out there, the hunters were still searching. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and poured himself a cup of coffee. His hands were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from fear and exhaustion. He hadn't slept since the night before. Every sound outside still made him jump. Elira and her child had survived the night, but for how long he knew this peace was fragile. Like a candle flickering in the wind, he went downstairs quietly, his boots creaking against the wooden steps. Elira was already awake, kneeling near her child, humming softly in her strange language. The baby's small hands glowed faintly, tracing patterns in the air like blue ribbons of light. Jake couldn't help but smile. "You two sure wake up early," he whispered. Elira looked up, her silver eyes calm but distant. "Sleep little," she said slowly. "Dreams. Bad." Jake nodded. "Yeah, I know the feeling." He sat beside her and handed her some food. Toast, apples, a little honey. She studied it carefully, then ate with slow, graceful movements. It still amazed him how human she seemed when she smiled. It wasn't the smile of some creature from another planet. It was the smile of a mother trying to stay strong for her child after breakfast. Elira reached for her wristband and pressed a hidden symbol. A small blue projection shimmered into the air, a glowing crystal spinning slowly. Jake frowned. "That's the thing they're after." "Isn't it?" She nodded. "Energy core," she said carefully. "Power. Life. Heal." The hologram shifted, showing images Jake barely understood. People healed, plants growing, cities shining again. He stared in awe. "It heals. Everything?" Elira nodded again, but wrong hands. "Destroy." Her tone grew heavy, and Jake could see sadness deep in her eyes. He realized she wasn't just running to save herself. She was trying to save the universe from her own invention. Jake leaned forward, fascinated. "You built that thing?" Alyra hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, I create to heal my world." The image changed again. Her planet before the war, covered in light, full of life, then darkness. Explosions, chaos. Jake felt his chest tighten. "And they turned it into a weapon." Alyra's voice cracked. "Yes, they use for death." She looked away. Guilt painted across her face like a shadow. Jake sat quietly, unsure what to say. He had lost someone too. "But not like this, not an entire world," he finally whispered. "You were just trying to help." Alyra looked at him with surprise. Like no one had said that to her before, her lips trembled slightly. "You understand." Jake smiled sadly. "I think I do." He thought about Sarah, how she used to say kindness was humanity's last true power. Maybe she was right, even across galaxies. Suddenly, the baby started to cry, a soft, glowing hum that filled the room. Jake reached out instinctively to help, but Alyra stopped him. She pressed a small silver pendant against the baby's chest, and the crying faded instantly. Jake blinked, amazed. "How did you—" Alyra smiled faintly. Memory link. "Calm." She hesitated before holding the pendant toward him. It pulsed with a faint blue light, like a heartbeat. Jake touched it gently, and for a second a wave of warmth rushed through him. He saw flashes, not clearly, but enough to feel emotion. A planet of silver skies, children laughing, cities of crystal. Then pain, fire, loss. He gasped and pulled his hand back, breath shaking. Alyra's eyes softened. "Now, you see?" Jake sat in silence for a while, trying to process what he had just experienced. He looked at Alyra and said quietly, "You didn't just lose your home, did you? You lost your people." Alyra nodded slowly. "All gone." Her voice broke on that single word, and she looked down at her child. "This one, last of us," she whispered, "must live." Jake felt something inside him shift. All his loneliness, all his grief suddenly felt smaller compared to hers. He realized he couldn't let the hunters win. Not now. Not after knowing the truth. The basement light flickered for a moment. Alyra looked up sharply, her expression changing. Jake frowned. "What is it?" She tapped her wristband. The map appeared again. This time, 3 red dots were closer than before, moving fast. Jake's stomach dropped. "They found the signal again," Alyra whispered. "They adapt." "Learn." Jake ran upstairs and peered out the window. He could see the faint glimmer of red lights approaching through the misty trees. "They're back," he said softly. "And this time, they're not leaving." He rushed back downstairs, his voice firm now. "Pack what you need. We can't stay here." Alyra hesitated, her face torn with fear and exhaustion. "Where go?" Jake grabbed his car keys from the hook on the wall. "Away from here. I know a place." He didn't know if that was true, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let them be caught. He looked at her, his voice steady. "We'll keep that core safe. I promise." Alyra stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. She reached out, touching his hand gently, her voice soft. "You risk for us? Why?" Jake smiled faintly. "Because once someone risked everything for me." They packed quickly. Food, water, blankets, and the glowing device. As Jake turned off the basement light, he caught one last glimpse of the hologram of her home. He whispered, "We'll find a way to make this right." And as the 3 of them stepped into the cold dawn, the first rays of sunlight hit Alyra's silver skin. For a brief second, she looked almost human, and Jake knew without doubt this wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about saving what was left of hope. The air outside was heavy with fog, hiding the rising sun behind a curtain of gray. Jake tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his old truck rumbled down the narrow road. The forest blurred past on both sides, but he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from within the trees. Alyra sat beside him, holding her child close under a thick blanket, her silver skin faintly glowing beneath the fabric. The little one was silent, sensing the tension in the air in the back seat. The small silver device in the energy core pulsed softly like a living heart. Jake drove fast, but his mind raced faster. Every sound of the engine, every flash of light in the rearview mirror made him flinch. He whispered under his breath, "Come on, old girl. Just hold together." The truck's engine coughed, then steadied again. He had no real plan, no safe place to go, only instinct and desperation guiding him. The hunters had technology far beyond his understanding. But he had something they didn't, determination. Alira turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. They follow, soon. Jake nodded grimly. I know. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, the tires kicking up wet gravel behind them after a few minutes. They reached a narrow bridge stretching across a dark river. Mist swirled above the water, reflecting faint glows of blue from the hidden device. Jake slowed the truck and pointed ahead. There's an old cabin across the river and no one goes there anymore. We'll hide and rest for a bit. Alira looked at him with uncertain eyes. Safe? Jake exhaled. As safe as we can be. They crossed the bridge carefully, the wood creaking under the truck's weight. On the other side, the dirt path led to a forgotten clearing surrounded by thick trees. The cabin was small and broken, but it would have to do. Jake parked the truck behind it, covering it with branches and leaves to blend with the forest. He helped Alira inside, guiding her to sit near the dusty fireplace. The smell of old wood and damp air filled the room. Alira looked around, curious but alert, her eyes scanning every shadow. Jake lit a small lantern and whispered, We'll stay here until night. Then we move again. For a while there was silence, the kind that hides fear beneath calm. Alira fed her child with a glowing liquid from a tiny vial, while Jake worked on the door, reinforcing it with broken planks when he finally sat down. Alira asked softly, Why you help me? You risk life. Jake stared into the flickering lantern light and said quietly, Because I've already lost enough. I couldn't save Sarah, but maybe I can save you. Alira tilted her head, recognizing the name. Sarah, your mate? Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, she was kind like you. Alira looked down, whispering, Kindness, strongest power. Her words echoed in the quiet cabin, and Jake smiled faintly. You sound like her. The peaceful moment didn't last long. A sudden static noise filled the air. Sharp and metallic, Alira's wristband glowed red. Flashing rapidly, her expression turned pale. They near, she whispered. Jake stood immediately, grabbing the flashlight and peering through a crack in the window. Through the mist, he saw faint red beams cutting through the forest, moving in a perfect formation. They found us, he muttered, his voice low and tense without hesitation. Jake turned to Alira. We can't stay. We need to split up. Alira shook her head, clutching her child tighter. No, together. Jake nodded. Okay. Then we fight smart. He moved to the truck bed, pulling out an old gas can and a roll of wire. Alira watched curiously as he connected the wire to the core's containment shell. What you do? She asked. Jake grinned, setting a surprise. He placed the modified device outside the cabin door, covering it with leaves. Then he turned back to Alira. When they get close, this thing will give them a light show they won't forget. The hum grew louder. The hunters were closing in fast. Jake could see their red visors glowing through the fog. He crouched beside Alira, whispering, When I say run, you run to the river. She nodded silently, her face calm but her hands trembling slightly. The child looked up at Jake, eyes glowing softly, almost like it understood. He gave a small smile. Don't worry, little one. We'll make it. The first hunter stepped into the clearing, his scanner pulsing blue. He raised his weapon, a sleek black device that hummed like electricity. Jake whispered, Now, and pulled the wire. A blinding flash exploded outside, blue and white light bursting through the fog. The hunters shouted, their visors flickering and failing. Jake grabbed Alira's hand, pulling her toward the back door. They ran into the trees as the explosion echoed through the forest. Branches whipped against Jake's face, but he didn't slow down behind them. He could hear shouting and the sound of machines rebooting. They recover fast, Alira warned. Jake nodded. Then we go faster. They reached the riverbank just as the fog began to thin. The water glowed faintly from the reflected energy pulse. Jake looked at the small metal boat tied to a rock, old but still afloat. He pushed it into the water and motioned for Alira to get in. She hesitated, looking back toward the cabin. Jake, she said softly, you come? He smiled weakly. Always. They paddled across quietly, the sound of water splashing mixing with distant echoes of pursuit. When they reached the other side, Alira looked at him with gratitude. Your courage. Rare, she whispered. Jake shrugged. I just don't like bullies. Even if they come from space, Elira smiled faintly, her silver eyes shimmering, for the first time since this began. Jake felt something strange. Peace. They sat there in silence, watching the sun rise slowly through the mist. The world felt different now, quieter, more fragile, yet full of possibility. But somewhere far behind them, the hunters regrouped, their scanners recalibrating. The chase was far from over, and both of them knew it. As the morning wind rippled across the river, Jake whispered, "This isn't the end. It's just the start of the fight." The morning sun broke through the clouds, turning the river into a stream of gold. For a brief moment, the world looked peaceful again, calm and almost normal. Jake sat at the edge of the riverbank, his boots soaked, his breath heavy from the long escape. Beside him, Elira cradled her sleeping child, the soft glow from the baby fading into gentle warmth. They had survived another night, but Jake knew it wasn't over. Not yet. He looked at the small metal device resting between them, the energy core. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Calm but powerful. "That thing," he said quietly. "It can save or destroy everything, can't it?" Elira nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "Yes. In right hands, life. In wrong hands, death." Jake sighed, rubbing his forehead. "And those hunters won't stop until they get it." Elira looked down, whispering, "They not stop until all is gone." For a few seconds, they both listened to the wind moving through the trees. Birds sang softly somewhere far away, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Jake turned to her, his voice low but determined. "Then we end this." "Elira, no more running." Elira looked up sharply. "End? How?" Jake pointed to the sky. "Your ship, can it still fly?" She hesitated. "Maybe. If fixed core link, but power low." Jake smiled faintly. "Then we give it one last chance." They walked through the forest, back toward where the crash first happened. The trees were quiet, but the air felt heavy, as if the forest remembered what had fallen there. When they reached the clearing, the remains of the pod still lay half buried in the dirt. Smoke stains marked the ground, and small sparks of energy flickered along the edges. Elira placed her hand on the metal and whispered in her language. The pod responded, humming weakly to life, its lights flickering like tired eyes trying to stay open. Jake knelt beside her, helping to reconnect wires and panels. He wasn't an engineer, but Elira guided him patiently. "Blue line, connect to red node," she said. Her hands moving fast, Jake followed her instructions, sweat dripping from his brow. He could feel the energy vibrating through the metal, each hum louder, stronger, closer to awakening. But before they could finish, a sharp sound echoed from the forest in a mechanical pulse. Jake froze. "They found us." Elira's face went pale. Too soon. He stood up, scanning the tree line, and saw red lights moving again. Closer this time, the hunters had tracked them, faster than he expected. Within seconds, their vehicles appeared at the edge of the clearing, black and silent like predators in the mist. Jake turned to Elira, shouting, "Finish it! Get the ship ready." He grabbed a metal rod from the ground, the closest thing to a weapon he could find. The hunters stepped out, weapons raised. "Return the core," one of them commanded in a cold, robotic tone. Jake gritted his teeth. "Come and take it." The first shot fired, a beam of blue energy slicing past his shoulder. He dove behind a rock, heart pounding. Elira screamed his name, but he yelled back, "Don't stop! Get your ship running." The hunters advanced, their visors glowing brighter as they scanned for movement. Jake's mind raced. He had no chance against their technology, but maybe he didn't need to win, just buy enough time. He picked up a sharp piece of metal and threw it at one of the glowing devices. It struck the scanner, sending sparks flying. The hunter staggered, momentarily blinded. Jake used that moment to rush forward. Tackling another one into the mud, the weapon clattered away, and he slammed the metal rod against its chest plate. Electric sparks burst out, and the machine-like voice went silent. Behind him, Elira shouted something in her language, and the ship roared to life. The pod began to glow again. Lifting slightly from the ground, wind and energy swirled around the clearing. Bending the trees, the hunters turned toward her, their weapons charging again. Jake saw it, one final chance. He grabbed the fallen hunter's weapon, aimed and fired. A blinding beam of light cut through the air, striking the lead hunter square in the chest. The explosion threw Jake backward, pain shooting through his body. When he looked up, The last of the hunters were retreating, their systems failing from the energy overload. Alira ran to him, kneeling beside his side, her hands glowing as she tried to heal his wounds. Her energy flowed like liquid warmth, sealing cuts and burns. Jake coughed, trying to smile. Guess it worked. Alira's eyes filled with tears. You save us. Again, he shook his head weakly. No, you saved me. The pod's engines roared louder, ready to leave. Alira looked at him with sorrow. I must go. Core not safe here. Jake nodded slowly, his voice soft. I know. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, glowing crystal, the same one that powered the core. She placed it in his hand. Keep. Light of hope. Jake stared at it, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. He didn't know what it was, but he felt its warmth. Something pure, something alive. Alira lifted her child and stepped into the pod. The ship's lights flared bright, casting silver and gold across the clearing. Jake stood back, shielding his eyes from the glow. The door began to close, but before it did, Alira looked at him one last time and whispered, You, human of heart, thank you. Then the ship rose slowly, higher and higher, until it vanished into the clouds, leaving only silence behind. Jake stood there for a long moment, staring at the sky. The forest was quiet again, the world still. He opened his hand and looked at the glowing crystal. It pulsed gently, like it was alive. Like it remembered. He smiled faintly, whispering, Happy birthday, Jake. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Because he finally understood that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change the fate of more than one world.